Gerald FitzGerald, 15th Earl of Desmond, was an Irish nobleman and leader of the Desmond Rebellions of 1579. Life. He was the son of James FitzGerald, 14th Earl of Desmond, by his second wife Maura O'Carroll. His father had agreed in January 1541, as one of the terms of his submission to Henry VIII of England, to send young Gerald to be educated in England. At the accession of Edward VI, proposals to this effect were renewed. Gerald was to be the companion of the young king. These projects were not carried out. Claims were made on the Desmond estate by the Butlers, the hereditary enemies of the Geraldines. James Butler, 9th Earl of Ormond, had married Lady Joan FitzGerald, daughter and heiress general of James FitzGerald, 10th Earl of Desmond. On Ormond's death she proposed to marry Gerald FitzGerald, and eventually did so after the death of her second husband, Sir Francis Bryan. The effect of this marriage was a temporary cessation of hostility between the Desmonds and her son, Thomas Butler, 10th Earl of Ormond. Earldom. Gerald succeeded to the earldom in 1558. He was knighted by the Lord Deputy Thomas Radcliffe, 3rd Earl of Sussex, and offered homage at Waterford. He soon established close relations with his namesake Gerald FitzGerald, 11th Earl of Kildare, and with Shane O'Neill. In spite of an award made by Sussex in August 1560 regulating the matters in dispute between Ormond and the FitzGeralds, outlaws from each side continued to plunder the other. For some time, Desmond resisted a summons to appear at Elizabeth's court with the plea that he was at war with his uncle Maurice. When he did appear in London in May 1562, his insolent conduct before the Privy Council resulted in a short imprisonment in the Tower of London. Desmond was detained in England until 1564, and soon after his return his wife died. He now raided Thomond, and in Waterford he sought to enforce his feudal rights on Sir Maurice FitzGerald of Decies, who invoked the help of Thomas Butler, the Earl of Ormond. This led into war, which came to an end at the Battle of Afton on the Blackwater River. Here Ormond's brother, Sir Edmund Butler of Clough-Grenin, hit Desmond in the right hip with a pistol shot, cracking his thigh bone and throwing him from his horse. About 300 Geraldines were killed, with many drowning as they were intercepted by armed boats in crossing the river. As the badly wounded captive Desmond was being carried shoulder high from the field, an Ormond commander rode up and jubilantly inquired, "Where is now the great Lord Desmond?" Desmond retorted, "Where but in his proper place, on the necks of the Butlers." Ormond took the wounded Desmond in captivity to Clonmel and then to Waterford City, where Lord Justice Nicholas Arnold took custody of him after a legal wrangle with Ormond. Ormond and Desmond were bound over in London to keep the peace, being allowed to return to Ireland early in 1566, where a royal commission was appointed to settle the matters in dispute between them. Desmond and his brother Sir John of Desmond were sent over to England, where they surrendered the lands to the Queen after imprisonment in the Tower. In the meanwhile, Desmond's cousin, James Fitzmaurice FitzGerald, caused himself to be acclaimed Captain of Desmond in defiance of Henry Sidney, and in the evident expectation of usurping the earldom. He sought to give the movement an ultra-Catholic character, with the idea of gaining foreign assistance, and allied himself with John Burke, son of the Earl of Clanricarde, with Conor O'Brien, 3rd Earl of Thomond, and even secured Ormond's brother, Sir Edmund Butler, whom Sidney had offended. Edward Butler also joined the rebellion, but the appearance of Sidney and Ormond in the southwest was rapidly followed by the submission of the Butlers. Most of the Geraldines were subjugated by Humphrey Gilbert, but Fitzmaurice remained in arms, and in 1571 Sir John Perrot undertook to reduce him. Perrot hunted him down, and at last on the 23rd of February 1573 he made formal submission at Kilmorley, lying prostrate on the floor of the church by way of proving his sincerity. Return to Ireland. Desmond was allowed to return to Ireland in 1573, despite the protestation of Elizabeth's councillors. He promised not to exercise Palatinate jurisdiction in Kerry until his rights to it were proven. He was detained for 6 months in Dublin, but in November slipped away. Edward FitzGerald, brother of the Earl of Kildare and lieutenant of the Queen's pensioners in London, was sent to remonstrate with Desmond, but accomplished nothing. Desmond asserted that none but Brehon law should be observed between Geraldines. Fitzmaurice seized Captain George Boucher, one of Elizabeth's officers in the west. Essex met the Earl near Waterford in July, and Boucher was surrendered, but Desmond refused the other demands made in the Queen's name. A document offering £500 for his head, and £1,000 to anyone who would take him alive, was drawn up but was vetoed by 2 members of the council. On the 18th of July 1574 the Geraldine chiefs signed a combination, promising to support the Earl unconditionally. Shortly afterwards Ormond and the Lord Deputy, William FitzGerald, marched on Munster and put Desmond's garrison at Derrynlaw Castle to the sword. Desmond submitted at Cork on the 2nd of September, handing over his estates to trustees. Sir Henry Sidney visited Munster in 1575, and affairs seemed to promise an early restoration of order, but Fitzmaurice had fled to Brittany in company with other leading Geraldines. John Edmund FitzGerald, Seneschal of Immokalee, who had held Ballamata against Sidney in 1567, and Edmund Fitzgibbon, the son of the White Knight who had been attainted in 1571. He intrigued at the French and Spanish courts for a foreign invasion of Ireland, and at Rome met the adventurer Thomas Stukely, with whom he projected an expedition which was to make a nephew of Pope Gregory XIII King of Ireland. In 1579 the adventurer landed at Smerwick Bay, where he was joined later by some Spanish soldiers at the Dunano. His ships were captured on the 29th of July 1579, and he himself was slain in a skirmish while on his way to Tipperary. Nicholas Sanders, the papal legate who had accompanied Fitzmaurice, sought to draw Desmond into rebellion. On the 1st of November 1579 Sir William Pelham proclaimed Desmond a traitor. The sack of Youghal and Kinsale by the Geraldines was speedily followed by attacks by Ormond and Pelham acting in concert with Admiral William Winter. In June 1581 Desmond took to the woods, but he maintained a considerable following for some time. By June 1583, when Ormond offered a price for his head, he was fleeing with only 4 followers. 5 months later, on the 11th of November 1583, he was murdered by Moriarty of Castle Drum, at Glenagenty, 5 miles east of Tralee at Botha and Iarla. The Moriarty chieftain was given a substantial reward by Queen Elizabeth. Desmond's brother, Sir John of Desmond, had been killed in December 1581, and the Seneschal of Immokalee had surrendered on the 14th of June 1583. This seneschal's lands excited envy. He was arrested in 1587, and died in Dublin Castle 2 days later. Children. By his second marriage to Eleanor Butler, daughter of the 1st Baron Dunboyne, the 15th Earl left 2 sons, the elder of whom, James FitzGerald, spent most of his life in prison. After an unsuccessful attempt in 1600 to 1601 to recover his inheritance, he returned to England, where he died, the title becoming extinct. The 15th Earl had at least 4 daughters: Joan, Catherine, who married Daniel O'Brien, 1st Viscount Clare; Ellis, who married Sir Valentine Brown, ancestor of the Earls of Kenmare; Ellen, who married 3 times, lastly to her cousin Edmund Butler, 3rd, 13th Baron Dunboyne, and died at a great age in 1660.